Hello everyone. In this short video update, I just want to talk to you a little bit about the assignments that you've turned in recently, the confidence assessment and the browsing communication journals, just to help contextualize these a little bit and give you a little bit of a preview of some of the ways in which this information will connect up to other assignments that we do in the course. So, if we start by looking a little bit at the confidence assessment, there's a few things that I want to draw your attention to here. One is just the format of this assignment. Most of you probably know that this was a survey. You've probably taken many surveys already in your life, so you get the general gist of what a survey looks like. But I also want to just highlight that surveys are really useful for finding out some types of information, but they might not be perfect for finding out all types of information. So what a survey can do is can tell you what people think. It basically asks people to report on themselves. So they can tell you what they think, they can tell you what they feel. In this case, they can tell you how confident they are in their abilities. And they can sort of also tell you what they think about their behavior. But that is not exactly the same thing as knowing actually how they behave. So for instance, I can ask someone in a survey to tell me how much TV they watch in a week, and I will receive some information about how much TV they think they watch in a week, which may or may not be identical with how much TV they actually watch in a week. Similarly, a confidence assessment asks students to assess how confident they are in their skills, in this case related to research and writing. But that doesn't necessarily mean someone might be very confident and may report that they're very confident, but it might not mean that they necessarily have the same skill set that I am anticipating or expecting that they have. So sometimes with surveys there can be a kind of disconnect between how people think of themselves or what they tell you and sort of an actual phenomenon. So it's important to kind of keep that in mind. They can always tell you what they think, but that might not be exactly synonymous with what you're interested in finding out. The other couple of things I'd like to draw your attention to is just as a kind of preview of some of the information that we're going to look at later in this course. One of these things is just thinking about the differences between quantitative and qualitative data. We'll talk a lot more in this course about quantitative and qualitative research, particularly toward the end of the last third. But this will just put this on your radar and get you thinking about a few things. So the first thing I would like you to think about is just this style of question. I'm sure you've seen it before, this idea, these kinds of questions that ask you to rate your response along some kind of scale, in this case from strongly agree to strongly disagree. These are called Likert style questions. And what a Likert style question allows you to do, or allows a researcher to do, is to collect numerical data that can provide some kind of a glimpse of a trend that might exist amongst the population. So for instance, with a set of questions that I ask the class, I can use the responses, because they are numerical responses, it's quantitative data, to determine the mean, median, mode, and range for each of the responses. And this gives me sort of a generalized picture of the trends overall of how the class sort of feels about their skills in these areas. So a few things that I can learn from this information are things like the question of whether people are confident about knowing how to effectively use the BSU library. There's a wide range of responses. It means while some people are very confident, others don't feel confident at all. And that while in general, right, the average is that people probably feel less confident than confident because it's 3.9. That the mode and the median both rest at 2. So it means the middle of the class is at a 2, and the mode, the most common response, was a 2. So it tells me most people feel pretty confident, but there is quite a few students who feel very much lack confidence in this area. So, in looking at this kind of numerical data, I can gain a sense of the general trends or the pattern that might exist across, in this case, a particular population, which is our class. This is going to be very different than the responses I got in terms of how confident students feel about their ability to use Google effectively. All right. So in this case, the average student response is 1.6, the median is 1, the mode is 1, the range is 1 to 3. So this tells me all students are answering in this space. Most are answering before they even get to the number 2. So people feel pretty confident about their ability to use Google. Now this may or may not end up being exactly the way that I anticipate what effective Google use might look like and what it might mean, which you'll learn more about in this class as well. But using this kind of numerical data can tell me some important things, but it generally tells me a kind of overview of a particular population. That is very different than what quantitative data, or I'm sorry, this quantitative data, that is very different than what qualitative data might tell me. So while I can learn that the class overall tends to feel this way about their research skills, I can't know why that might be the case. This kind of information can't tell me why. It can't tell me what are the specific issues that these students who lack confidence in their ability to use the library, why that might be, or what specific issues they have concerns about, or in this case, why students feel very confident about their ability to use Google. Is it just because they've used Google a lot, or is it because they know a lot of tricks to be able to locate specific information? I can't know those details from this kind of quantitative data. I could begin to get at some of those details from a qualitative research process. A qualitative research process tends to explore questions about meaning and tends to look at issues in a much more in-depth manner. That said, what I can't gain from a qualitative analysis is a kind of generalized picture. So in this case, I asked 3 more qualitative questions that ask students to put in their own responses. And this can give me some important information. One of the things it can do is to provide a space for a researcher to be surprised by what they find out. So while it's not super surprising to me that a lot of students are worried about things like evaluating sources or writing, it was less something I was less likely to imagine would be a real concern about meeting deadlines or essentially kind of keeping up in the course. So in giving people a space to provide some context or some deeper response, I guess, to a question, I'm able to gather information that I don't necessarily anticipate as a researcher. The other thing you'll notice about qualitative data is that it requires the researcher to do some sorts of interpretation. So while I can put together a list of things mentioned about what students might be worried about in the course or what they might be excited about, this list of things doesn't tell me a whole lot. If I want to do something with the information, then I'm, as the researcher, I'm going to have to interpret that to some extent. And so when I look through this set of responses, one of the things I start to notice is how often concerns about writing are mentioned, both in terms of something students are worried about. And so, for instance, evaluating sources might not exactly be the same as writing, but it is part of the writing process. So as an researcher, I could interpret that as one aspect of writing that students are concerned with. I also noticed that students are excited about improving writing. So I could use this information, both of these questions, to make some kind of an argument that, both that writing is a central concern, but also is central to this class and is central to what students would like to get out of this course. We will talk a lot more about these differences between quantitative and qualitative data, when we might use these different techniques for gathering information, and as readers of research, what kind of questions you should ask of the information that you're receiving from these different approaches to research, much more throughout the course. But I wanted to take this opportunity to just highlight this information for you right now. The other thing I want to talk to you about for just a second is the browsing communication research assignment that you did. If you have not turned this in, you can still receive some partial credit for it, but you need to turn it in as soon as possible. So many of you highlighted different things that you found in doing this assignment, and I just want to draw your attention to a few of those. Several people mentioned that one thing that they noticed in browsing these journals was that there's really a broad array of topics that get covered in communication. This is very true. It's one of the things that actually has always appealed to me in the study of communication, but it also is one of those things I try to highlight for students, because it means that almost anything you are interested in can be turned into a communication topic with a little creativity. So I think that's an important thing to keep in mind when you consider what kinds of research topics you might want to explore in this course, as well as in courses in the future. Some people mentioned that there is oftentimes a focus on contemporary issues, things that are happening sort of right now, or fairly recent events. And also a kind of focus on problems that people are interested in. This is also very true. It's a mark of communication that many of our topics are sort of central to what is happening in culture today. So thinking about mining your own cultural experiences and sort of like experiences within the lived society right now for potential research topics and directions is a really good idea. Many people mentioned how often social media or other forms of media were used as topics, not just for researchers in media studies, but also for researchers interested in public relations or even communication and culture. This is very true, that media is a kind of ubiquitous form of communication in our contemporary society, and therefore really all areas of communication research can focus on how media works in those different arenas. And that different journals really publish very different kinds of articles. So especially I think in Public Relations Review, you'll notice that those articles are pretty specific to the kinds of issues that public relations practitioners would care about. These are kinds of research articles that have a lot of references, where people are collecting their own data or creating their own argument or theory. You'll notice that most of these articles are at least 10 pages long, if not longer, and that's a mark of being a scholarly source. The last thing I want to mention is that there are still a lot of issues with APA citation. I'm not marking you off significantly for that at this point in time, but that will start to become the case. So make sure you use the APA guides. There is one in the back of your Palmquist book. I highly recommend that you use that. A few sort of key points are to watch for full names in your citation versus using just initials. To watch for capitalization in the article titles, whether you need it or not. Sometimes you won't need it where you think you do. And in APA, we usually use a DOI number instead of retrieved from. So you should be paying attention to that as well. So from here on out, I suggest that you pay some attention to correct APA citations, because I'll be paying attention to that too in your assignment.